Welcome to Business Talk here on businesstech.coza, where we get into the minds and missions of influential leaders shaping the future of this fantastic country. Today we have a very special guest with us, Karabo Ozah, who is the director of the Center for Child Law and a lecturer at the University of Pretoria. Karabo is a formidable advocate for children's rights, and her work has significantly impacted the landscape of child law in South Africa. So we're very excited to explore her journey, the accomplishments of the Centre for Child Law, and also many of the critical issues facing child protection in our country. Karabo, a real honor to have you on the show today. Let's just start by understanding what drew you to this incredibly important field of child law.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. So, funny enough, child law found me. So I studied law here at the University of Pretoria, and I always had this idea that I want to use the law to make a difference. So when I finished my degree, I did my articles of clerkship at the law clinic, which is the general law clinic here at the university, which has been there for about 40 years or so. So I did my articles, and one day one of my colleagues who was working a little bit at the Center for Child Law as a researcher came and said, "Look, we're looking for an attorney at the Center for Child Law." And I said, "Center for Child Law?" She's like, "Yeah, let me show you what we do." The center was still kind of fairly new at that time. And then she showed me, and then I applied to become an attorney at the center, got the position. And as a way to kind of springboard my knowledge and improve my knowledge of child law, then I registered for my master's in child law immediately. And I never looked back. So it kind of found me and then became something that I'm really passionate about.
It's interesting that we've got a Centre for Child Law at the University of Pretoria. So who started the centre? How did the establishment of the Centre for Child Law actually come about?
So the center was established by our former professor here, who's now an emeritus professor, Professor Trainee Boozer. She retired in 2019. And she started the center in 1998. So last year, December, we're celebrating 25 years of the center. When she started it, she had been exposed to some academics from overseas who were starting to look at child law as a separate field of study and looking at children's rights. Obviously, we had just come out of, our history, and we were ratifying conventions such as the Convention on the Rights to the Convention on Rights of Children, the UN one. And then she started thinking about, can child law also be a self-standing area of law of study, and start doing research and publishing around children's rights. So she did that. And at the launch of the center, we had at that time the ministers of justice who came and attended. I was still in high school. I was not here yet. So she started that in 1998. And then subsequently, then my predecessor, Professor Anne Skelton, who then became the second director of the center, when she joined, and she came with the idea that apart from just researching, we need to enforce children's rights. We have a brand new constitution with a beautiful Section 28 that lists all the rights that children have, but we need to make sure they become a reality. Then she started getting some funding then to do the litigation. And, Professor Anne Skelton is actually currently the chair of the UN Committee on the Rights on the Rights of the Child at the UN, as kind of representing South Africa, obviously as an expert independent, but she now sits and heads that because she's done great work. And that's a person who, for the most of my career, then mentored me. And we started then merging research and academic stuff with litigation and issues pertaining to policy reform and contributing to that.
I think that really is what sets the centre apart, isn't it? Because often, and you mentioned, we've got this wonderful constitution, and sometimes it's only as good as the kind of paper it's written on if we don't enforce it, if we don't live it, if we don't ensure that we give effect to, as you say, Section 28 of the Constitution. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about how the association with the University of Pretoria helps you contribute to the establishment and protection of children's rights. How does that come together in a way that really breathes life into this mission to ensure that we are protecting the most important assets of our society, which is our young ones?
Yes. So, as a starting point, the university, the center is part of the university, part of the Department of Private Law. We sit there and we teach child law, which I think is also an important aspect because we also sensitizing attorneys who are about to go into the field about the specialized nature of children's rights, be them in, socioeconomic rights, how and the impact on children, be that children who are caught up between disputes where families fight over custody and contact. So we are teaching, we also do that. But what we bring also to our teaching is these cases that we've done before, we've argued before the courts, giving interpretation and life to children's rights, and also reminding people why children deserve special protection in the law, but also in reality. So for us as a center, the university, we are part of the university in that way. Being part of the university also enhances our research. So we do a lot of research that we can publish. Obviously, we publish journal articles as well, which is also good for the university. But I would say that we are part of the university. So how we do our work is embedded in also making sure that even when we litigate, our papers are, we do quite extensive research to support our litigation, because it's not just getting an outcome, but it's an outcome that most of the time changes the law, and then you have to ensure that it's implemented in a way that really benefits the children. And then what we do, which is very important as well, is that we do monitor a long term the impact of our judgments. So we do small projects here and there where we particular big cases, where there had to be, for instance, an implementation of a certain legislative amendments or actions that the respondents had to do. Then we do research to actually measure, did we actually move what we thought we were moving? If not, where did we go wrong, and where can we go going forward? So that, I think, being at the university enhances how we do our work. Let me put it that way, because you're always not just thinking about getting a solution from the court, but very research intensive, and then also the follow up, and then also publishing, in a way, not only the academic stuff, but also publishing publications that are very accessible to also in a way that educates people.
Yeah, and in that way, definitely bridging academia and kind of the real world to a certain extent. It also sounds like it's an expensive exercise. I mean, you've got to go and appear in court, senior counsel, all of that. Are you funded by the university? Do you get private donations? How are you funded? And how does the work that you're doing, how is that supported through this collaboration with the university?
Yes, very important. It is an expensive endeavor to do the work that we do. But I think, so as a start, let me say that the university, obviously, we are here, we have the offices and the office space. There's about 8 of us as staff members that is, covered by the university. The university does cover salaries for some of our staff members, not all. So I do have to raise funds, so we have, I would say, 5 to 6 philanthropic donors who've been supporting our work over the years. And over the years, I mean like really long term over the years. Obviously, we get grants at like 3-year grants at a time. You report, you show the impact, and then you do a new application. So we're grateful that we've managed to keep those donors. And I mean, one of the big issues with donors is to show that your work is being impactful. But also some of the donors always wants to see that the university is also supporting the center. So it's become also a very mutually beneficial exercise in that the donors, some of them will directly say to the university, if you support the center in this way, we'll up what we're giving them in this way. And in that way, then it gives us a little bit more sustainability and a little bit more financial stability. Yeah, but it's a tough job to raise the funding. In terms of the court, Michael, litigating and stuff, we actually are very, a little bit, let me call it brave. What we do is that we have this model where, when I got to the center, Professor Ann Skelton taught me that there are cases that we can argue ourselves. I argue cases all the way to the Constitutional Court, and that saves money because I'm already paid. The junior staff members, now we're opening up for them. Once they get the right of appearance in the High Court, they start with kind of unopposed applications. Then when we have amicus applications where the issues are not too complicated, they argue there. We sit next to them, they argue the cases. So we do that, and that's one really big way of saving money. And Monday this week, one of our colleagues was arguing a matter where we're litigating against Home Affairs. We do it ourselves. We brainstorm, we check each other's papers, and then we reserve the money for where we really need to engage senior counsel. But because also of the work that we do, we are lucky that there's some senior counsel who are willing to do work for us pro bono or at reduced rates because we can't afford their full fees. And that comes with creating a very good working environment, but also still doing a lot. So even when we brief outside counsel, we do a lot of work in-house. We always have to own and know our papers and our work, in our cases. And then in that way, then we can really help each other so that they don't start from scratch with just drafting and everything, because that then becomes very costly. So we promote this approach that if you're saying you're a child law expert, you must be able to do your case from beginning to end, and be, it's good for you for your development. Yeah, that's another way of kind of cutting costs. Yeah,
it's a dynamic approach. The phrase "dynamite comes in small packages" comes to mind. If you think about you just a staff complement of 8, but doing all of this, and we're chatting on Mandela Day, and great to hear that there are senior counsel willing to do this kind of work either pro bono or at reduced rates, because I think it is critical work. And I mean, you mentioned the Centre for Child Law is more than just an academic organization. You contribute extensively to developing child law through reform, through case law, through policy development, and more. Are there any examples of this that you're particularly proud of?
Well, there's a lot, but maybe what I should focus on is I'll call it a cluster of 3-4 cases that we recently got nice judgments from the Constitutional Court. And the importance of these judgments is that they shift in their thinking around discrimination against children based on the families that they come from. So we have about 3 judgments coming from the Constitutional Court where, in the main, there were different laws in different spheres that discriminated against children because of their parents not being married and things like that. So let me quickly tell you the first one. First one has to do with birth registration. Very crucial. And what we had in our Birth and Death Registration Act was provisions that did not allow a father who's unmarried to go and register the child on their own without the mother. So the law assumed that the mother is there, she must always come, and you cannot say the mother is not around. So we challenged that, and it went all the way to the Constitutional Court. And we were aiming for the court to even just say, oh, let it go to Parliament and let Parliament review. But the court was very, very accommodative and immediately struck down the provisions that were offending. It said children must be able to be registered by their father if the mother is not there. Obviously, in practice, we're still seeing a lot of problems, and we're doing some follow-up cases on that. And then there was also another one that's linked with that about the rights of children where their parents are not married and they're fighting about their care and contact. Again, the law made it possible for the parents who are married to go automatically to get assistance from the Office of the Family Advocate, but not a similar provision for children for where parents are unmarried. And you can see all these laws, what we figured out was that they were written in a different era. And as we're going now and get, since we have the Constitution, we're supposed to be doing a review of these laws so that children don't get disadvantaged because of the status of their parents, particularly where we know that most people are not getting married anymore, part before you even get to the high rates of divorce, but people are choosing not to get married. So when you have laws that give an advantage to children based on the marital status of their parents to the exclusion of others, you are creating a problem, and inequality is a big issue in our country. So, I think those two highlight kind of this systemic issues, but I mean, there's a lot across education, across children who are in conflict with the law, which is a very difficult issue that most people don't want to talk about. But we've done a lot of work to clearly really get judgments that say, yes, they committed offenses, but they're still children and you must invest in their rehabilitation. Again, implementing rehabilitation is a challenge, and we're doing some work around that as well with the South African Human Rights Commission.
Yeah, there's so much that still needs to be done, and I want to come to your focus a little bit later on. But in all of this, I'd like to understand, what some of the challenges or major issues that you face when trying to change child law for the better in South Africa. So,
as much as we also firstly then litigate, obviously sometimes you get the court order and enforcing them is a problem. So, the respondents being the state, or then they don't comply with the order, then you end up having to go back to court again. So the respect of the court orders is something that in recent times we see that we struggle with, particularly the state respondents, obeying the court orders. So that is a bit of a challenge. Sometimes when they do obey, it's a slow pace of it. They will tell you about currently, budgetary constraints is the first thing everybody tells you about. And that's very concerning because it's leading to a regression on children's rights. where we can see that implementing is, some areas, particularly in, let's say, for instance, you'll be familiar with the story about the pit toilets and the many
Yeah.
children who've fallen into pit toilets and die. I mean, we're working on cases like that with other organizations such as Section 27, EE, and EE Law Center. And one of the big things there is we keep being told that budgets, and now they're extending the time frame for eradicating those pit toilets and all those things. So those things are very frustrating. And, recently we had a meeting where we were saying we're starting to also question ourselves, like, what are we promising children through our work? And we need to reflect about it and what else can we do? Because that is becoming a very strong issue that we're seeing, that implementing is something that we struggle with, and it then negates our whole purpose. And also it means that we're not moving on what the country promised children. So that worries me a lot. That is the one big issue I worry about. And then the other thing that creeps up now and then is it's also this thing of people not really entirely respecting children's rights, and people say, oh, these children have too many rights. It's a perception that you not just see from government, but more a societal one. And we're trying to do some educative material around that, because I think, as much as we rave about our constitution, once you start having this idea that people think that people, whether children or other people, have too many rights, it's very risky. And I always say, when people say that, well, let's open the constitution and tell me which right do you think is too much here for any child. So we need to educate people about how actually, if we work together to create a protective environment for children, none of those rights that the law has given children are a threat to you if you're doing the right thing. So, but that is something that I think is a big issue, because we haven't done enough, I would say, to take society with us on not just issues of children, broader issues and changing people's mindsets about how we respect each other's rights. We still need to do quite a bit of work on the ground.
Yeah, I think it's an apex issue, and we don't give it enough attention. You're right. And I think the media's got a role to play here as well, because if you think about early childhood development, if you think of stunting, malnutrition, and how that feeds into poor educational outcomes and throughput, that all also dovetails with the pit latrine story. I mean, it should make us angry that we have children dying in pit toilets in South Africa in 2024. I mean, if there's anything to be rising up and really venting our displeasure about, it's these kinds of issues. That said, though, I'm cautiously optimistic with the tone I've heard from the Government of National Unity, and some new ministers obviously breathing fresh life into certain departments, and I see pit latrines is certainly on one of the ministers' agendas. Are you confident that this GNU will be able to work with a centre like yours to help address some of these challenges?
Well, I'm like you. I'm cautiously optimistic. I did notice that the Minister of Education, Basic Education, did mention that she wants to get into those. I mean, I think it can work. And Michael, the other thing that maybe, as much as I talk about the space for the budget dwindling, one of the things that we've seen is the lack of proper spending, right? And underspending, and money is going back. So if they start holding people accountable for those things, give you an example. Eastern Cape is one of the provinces with the most problematic infrastructure for schools, and they were sending money back. As recent as last year, they sent millions back to Treasury instead of building schools and stuff. So if they start being held accountable, if there's accountability, maybe we'll get somewhere. The problem is that you can say all those nice things, but if you don't hold the people who are supposed to implement accountable when they fail, and actually put in place a process, for instance, to ensure that the spending is done in a way that is correct and that will benefit the children, then we will not get there. So I think one of the big issues that we have to go back to is holding people accountable. I mean, you would have seen some reports where they say somebody starts building a school, and then they fight with the school, or the contractors stop coming. Instead of government going after them to recoup the money, they just get somebody else who's new to start and all that. So those kind of nitty-gritties on the ground, that where we lose money and then we don't make progress for children, there needs to be accountability right there. It's not enough to just say, well, they send back money to Treasury. Why? How? And how are we going to avoid that going into the future?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if they can start doing that, maybe there is some hope.
Yeah, accountability and execution. I hope those become the centerpieces of the seventh administration. And, I think there is at least the political accountability that we saw with the electorate voting their displeasure. And hopefully that will provide the pressure for that change. Just lastly, what are your biggest focuses at the center at the moment?
Well, the biggest one is the most depressing one, which is violence against children and sexual violence, Michael. We know we have high rates of sexual violence. You would have seen during COVID and post-COVID the high rates of young girls being pregnant, most of them being victims of statutory rapes and things like that. So we've done some research about, how courts deal with children who are victims of sexual violence. And the magistrates that participated in our research told us that we need to look at the whole value chain system, right? So now we're thinking about the prosecution, the police, where are the gaps in relation to what everybody's doing. And that's why, you also know that people don't report cases. We know we have a very low conviction rates on sexual violence cases. There are also things in the law that could be barriers to, particularly for children as witnesses and their testimonies being taken seriously in court. So we're looking into that. We've done some research. We do continue some research. And the last thing that we're also doing is that not last, but important thing that we did this year is we launched a new case against Minister of Justice, because in our Sexual Offences Act, there's a special defense for adults who engage in sexual conduct with particularly, let's say, girls, because unfortunately it ends up being girls, most of the victims. And they have a special defense that they can say they were deceived by the younger person to say that they are of age. And we found that very problematic because, and we saw in 2-3 cases in the courts, it puts the onus on the young child to disprove that the adult knew that they were a child or not. And to have that still in our law in 2024, and that, contributes again to the gender, patriarchal approach, the higher rates of sexual violence, because the law has a special defense for adults. So we've launched that case. We're waiting for the response from government, but we also will be doing quite a lot more on violence. And, you would have seen the public protector had a report that came out on the courts and sexual violence courts. And we're doing some work around that. And there's some people in government that want to collaborate and do some research and advocacy around the issues that we're seeing. But that is a big systemic issue right now. Children cannot enjoy anything, because every day sexual violence everywhere, in the media, in their day-to-day lives. And that is certainly an indictment on our society.
It really is. But Karabo Ozah, your dedication to advancing child law and protecting the rights of children in South Africa is at least something that offers hope and inspiration, and certainly appreciate the critical work that you and the Centre for Child Law are doing, and look forward to seeing how your efforts continue to shape a better future for the most vulnerable and the youngest members of our society. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Michael. Nice chatting to you. Thanks.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Business Talk here on businesstech.co.za. A very sobering conversation, but a critical conversation if we are to truly give effect to our world-leading constitution. We hope this conversation has provided you with a deeper understanding of the challenges and the triumphs in the field of child law. Stay informed and engaged as we continue to bring you conversations with the leaders making a difference in South Africa right here on businesstech.co.za.